Welcome back. We start our news bulletin from Afghanistan, where 22 Afghan soldiers have been killed in a Taliban attack in eastern Laghman province. The provincial officials said dozens of vehicles of security forces were damaged in the attack. In a statement, the Afghan Defense Ministry said the attack was pushed back by the Afghan forces in a Lashing district of the province. Claiming the responsibility, the Taliban said 24 soldiers were killed and 30 others wounded in ambush on security checkpoint. Spokesperson Zabiullah Mujahid said 13 armor personnel carriers were destroyed in the attack. Meanwhile, the Taliban said they have released 53 more government prisoners in Badghis and Faryab province. The group said each prisoner was given clothes and travel compensation. Meanwhile, Afghanistan's intelligence agency National Directorate of Security has alleged that the Taliban still maintain close ties with terrorist groups. Agency head Ahmad Zia Sarraj said this relationship violates the Doha deal. During a briefing, Sarraj claimed the Taliban leadership is still thinking of a comeback to power by military means. The intelligence chief said the fighters do not value things like mutual tolerance and peace. Meanwhile, Afghan Minister of Interior Masood Andrabi said the Taliban will not be able to win on the battlefield. Moving on, an Iranian Navy officer has been killed and several others wounded in an incident on a military ship during a naval exercise in the Gulf of Oman. The Gulf of Oman connects to the Strait of Hormuz, through which about a fifth of the world's oil passes. The Iranian state media said the incident took place aboard the Konarak support ship. It is a domestically made missile-launching warship which joined the naval fleet in 2018. It said another ship accidentally fired a missile onto the Konarak during a live fire exercise. The state media said the incident is being probed. The Indian Supreme Court has refrained from passing any decisive orders on the restoration of 4G internet in occupied Kashmir. The Indian government has suspended high-speed internet services in the occupied valley for the last 281 days. The ROPCO directed Delhi to constitute a special committee to examine the contentions raised by the petitioners. In its verdict, the three-member bench said the court has to ensure national security and human rights are balanced. Criticizing the verdict, Indian lawyers accused the bench of abdication of judicial responsibility. They said the verdict says the executive will decide whether the executive violated fundamental rights. Spain has recorded its lowest daily death count from coronavirus in 7 weeks, with 123 fatalities in the past 24 hours. Meanwhile, the number of infections in Russia has surged past 220,000, becoming the third highest in the world after Spain. Earlier, the United States reported 776 fatalities in a day, pushing the country's overall total to nearly 80,000. The global COVID-19 death count has crossed 282,000, with over 4.1 million infections. More in this report.
In the US, New York State is investigating 85 cases of children with an inflammatory disease linked to COVID-19. Governor Andrew Cuomo also announced new rules for senior care facilities in the state after reports that 1/3 of all US coronavirus deaths are nursing homes, residents or workers. He said all nursing homes in New York will be required to test staff twice a week for the virus.
If a nursing home cannot provide care for a person and provide the appropriate level of care for any reason, they must transfer the person out of the facility. If they can't find another facility, they call the State Department of Health.
In France, primary schools will start with small numbers of pupils today. Clothes shops, bookshops, hair salons and florists are also reopening. In some region of Spain, gatherings of up to 10 people will be allowed, and outdoor spaces at restaurants can reopen with social distancing measures. Britain's Prime Minister Boris Johnson has announced a cautious easing of country's lockdown. He has encouraged those who cannot work from home to go back to their workplaces and allowed people to go out for unlimited exercise. But Johnson warned the public to remain alert for a second spike in cases.
That it would be madness now to throw away that achievement by allowing a second spike. We must stay alert. We must continue to control the virus and save lives. And yet we must also recognise that this campaign against the virus has come at colossal cost to our way of life.
Meanwhile, New Zealand will allow restaurants, cafes, cinemas and shopping centres to reopen, as well as travel within the country to resume from Thursday. Children in Australia's state of New South Wales have begun to return to school after weeks off due to lockdown.
Meanwhile, Pakistan has reported nearly 1,500 coronavirus cases in the last 24 hours, which took the total infections to some 31,000. The Health Ministry says 28 more patients have died, while the death toll stands at 667. The ministry said almost 11,400 tests have been conducted since yesterday. It said more than 8,200 coronavirus patients have recovered across the country. The ministry said the province of Punjab has reported the most cases at 11,568. Meanwhile, the sixth consignment of goods containing 17 tons of medical supplies has arrived in Pakistan from China. Officials said the equipment includes 24 X-ray machines and their parts, 371,000 VTMs for testing and over 1 million masks. Now, the number of recoveries from the coronavirus outbreak has exceeded 1.4 million worldwide. The highest number was registered in the US with over 200,000 recoveries, while it also remains the hardest hit country. Germany follows the US with more than 144,000 recoveries, Spain with 136,000, and Italy with over 105,000. Turkey also entered the world's top 5 countries in terms of COVID-19 recoveries, with nearly 92,700 people beating the disease. Meanwhile, scientists have found evidence for mutations in some strains of COVID-19 that suggest the pathogen may be adapting to humans. The analysis shows 2 genetic changes that alter the critical spike protein the virus uses to infect human cells. Moving on to Niger, where 20 people have been killed in attacks by unidentified gunmen on several villages in TALIBAN region. The regional governor told media that the assailants looted shops, stole cattle, and ordered village inhabitants to flee. Since 2017, a state of emergency has been in place in TALIBAN, which borders Mali, Burkina Faso, and Benin. Militants affiliated to the ISIS and Al-Qaeda continue to operate in the region, weakening control by national governments. Attacks by these groups have killed 170 government soldiers since December last year. Last week, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres warned that militant groups in the Sahel were exploiting the coronavirus pandemic to step up attacks. Meanwhile, in Mali, 3 UN peacekeepers have been killed and 4 others wounded after their convoy hit a roadside bomb. In a statement, the UN mission chief in Mali said the peacekeepers were on a routine patrol during the incident in Agulhe commune. The UN mission said it will make every effort to identify and apprehend those responsible for these terrorist attacks. UN Chief Antonio Guterres condemned the attacks, saying the perpetrators must be brought to justice. The UN mission has 13,000 troops from several nations deployed across the vast semi-arid country. Mali is struggling to contain a militant insurgency that erupted in 2012, which has claimed thousands of military and civilian lives. Iraq's judiciary has ordered courts to release anti-government protesters. Supreme Judiciary Council said the move is in line with the call by Prime Minister Mustafa al-Kadhimi to release the protesters. The council reiterated that the right to protest is guaranteed by the Constitution, provided that it does not violate the law. Anti-government rallies have resumed in several cities, clashing with security forces and ending months of relative calm. A medical official said that around 20 protesters suffered breathing difficulties from tear gas, but no shots were fired. More than 550 people have been killed since the protests began against corruption and overhaul of ruling class in Iraq. Coronavirus continues to wreak havoc across several Middle Eastern countries with a spike in new cases and deaths. Saudi Arabia touched its highest one-day tally with nearly 2,000 new cases, taking the total to almost 39,048. More in this report.
The Health Ministry of Qatar reported over 1,000 new cases of the coronavirus, bringing the total to above 22,000. Kuwait also touched its highest toll, with more than 1,000 new cases in the last 24 hours. The new infections increased the total number of cases to nearly 9,000. Reeling behind, the UAE saw a spike of 780 new cases after easing curbs. Oman registered nearly 200 new coronavirus cases over the past 24 hours, bringing the tally to about 4,000. Bahrain confirmed 150 new cases of COVID-19, while taking the overall deaths to 8. Egypt's health ministry reported 11 new deaths, bringing the total to 514.
The World Health Organization and the International Organization for Migration have called on Yemen to continue to accept migrants. This follows concerns of rising discrimination towards migrants in the country after they are being referred to as coronavirus transmitters. In a statement, WHO said the virus respects no borders and targets everyone regardless of race, political affiliation, or geographical location. IOM said migrants should not be stigmatized or associated with the risk of importing diseases. It said barriers to health services, poor living and working conditions on the route from Africa to the Arabian Gulf are the ones that pose serious health risks. The WHO and IOM have ensured the inclusion of migrants in the public health response led by the Yemen authorities. Wuhan, the epicenter of the new coronavirus outbreak in China, has reported its first cluster of infection since lockdown in the city was lifted a month ago. Wuhan reported 5 new confirmed cases in the same residential compound. In a statement, the health authority said the task of epidemic prevention and control in the city is still very heavy. Meanwhile, South Korea has reported a spike of 69 new infections, most of which are connected with an outbreak at several bars and nightclubs in Seoul. Officials say they have tested 4,000 people so far, but the authorities are still trying to track down 3,000 more who were at the venues. We're taking a short break, but stay tuned for more news. Welcome back. Japan says it has postponed its joint fighter aircraft exercise with India. In a statement, the Japanese Defense Ministry said it would have been the first fighter aircraft training jointly held by both the countries. It said two sides agreed to promote defense cooperation and exchanges to uphold and reinforce a free and open Indo-Pacific. The development comes a day after the Indian and Chinese troops had a brief skirmish in Sikkim. The Indian Defense Ministry said some troops were injured in the incident. It said the two sides disengaged after dialogue and interaction at the local level. In Mexico, the remains of 25 people have been found buried in a mass grave outside the western city of Guadalajara. The Jalisco state prosecutor said the remains have been transferred to a local morgue for further examination. Locals said dogs uncovered the bones at an abandoned farm in the town of El Salto, south of Guadalajara. So far this year, 115 bodies have been found in at least 10 clandestine graves in Jalisco, most of them outside Guadalajara. The state has been the scene of rising violence during the past 5 years linked to a powerful drug cartel, Jalisco Nueva Generación. In Uganda, 15 workers have died as an under-construction building collapsed on the outskirts of the country's capital, Kampala. Local council chairman said 40 people were working on the building, but 20 of them spent nights at the site due to COVID-19 curfew. The chairman said those who sleep at the construction site have perished. Preliminary investigations indicate that substandard materials were being used in the construction of the 4-story building. Poland's top electoral body has given the parliament speaker 14 days to set a new date for presidential elections. In a resolution, the State Electoral Commission said the election must be held within 60 days of this announcement or by late July. The State Electoral Commission chief said postponement of Sunday's vote can be blamed on coronavirus and the legislative process. It was the first time in almost 31 years of Polish democracy that voter turnout clocked in at zero and election was declared null and void. Poland found itself in a bizarre predicament in which presidential ballot was neither formally postponed nor cancelled. The situation arose after the government and opposition failed to agree on a constitutional solution to hold an election during the COVID-19 crisis. In China, the Shanghai Disneyland theme park has reopened to visitors with controlled capacity after the COVID-19 pandemic became more passive. After a brief opening ceremony, the park became the first Disney's park to officially reopen for business in the world. Park authorities say they have adopted strict prevention and control measures, including limiting the number of visitors to 30% of its normal capacity. They said visitors need to wear masks, pass temperature checks, and show their health certificates to enter the Wonderland. Senior Vice President of the Shanghai Disney Resort, Andrew Ballstein, said more frequent disinfection is being carried out at the park.
We've also enhanced our cleaning and sanitization throughout the park, so we have many more cast members out wiping down surfaces, high touch, medium touch, low touch objects to make sure again that we are providing that safe environment for our guests. In addition, we've added over 300 hand sanitizers throughout the park at the exits of attractions, inside shops and restaurants to make sure that our guests have that ability to continue to keep their hands clean, which is one of the major means of preventing transmission.
The UK and the EU will resume the third round of post-Brexit trade talks today ahead of a decisive summit next month. The latest round of talks will be held via video conference, which will end on Friday. London and Brussels are due to decide on extending the current deadline for negotiating an agreement beyond 31st December. The two sides continue to struggle to reach an agreement on a wide range of areas. After negotiations this week, a fourth round of talks is scheduled to begin on next month. Under the withdrawal agreement, both sides have until 31st December to ratify the trade deal and rules for future cooperation. Saudi Arabia says it will triple its value-added tax and halt monthly handout payments to citizens in new austerity measures. The announcement comes as Riyadh struggles with double economic shock of COVID-19 pandemic and record oil price slump. Finance Minister Mohammed Al-Judan said the cost of living allowance will be halted from June, while VAT will be raised from 5% to 15% from July 1st. Judan said Riyadh is expected to lose half of its oil income, which contributes about 70% of public revenues. He said Riyadh will borrow close to $60 billion this year to plug a huge budget deficit. The kingdom posted a $9 billion budget deficit in the first quarter of this year. Japan says it will take more emergency stimulus measures to combat the economic fallout from COVID-19 pandemic. In a speech at a parliamentary session, Prime Minister Shinzo Abe says Tokyo is ready to compile a second supplementary budget. Abe said the government will consider additional steps such as aid to firms struggling to pay rent, support for students. He said more subsidies will also be given to companies hit by slumping sales. Abe declined to reveal the size of spending and said the decision will depend on how many states can lift emergency measures, but the opposition said government should deploy fresh spending of $936 billion funded by a 100-year coronavirus bond. Japan compiled a record over $1 trillion economic stimulus package in April, focused on cash payouts to households and loans to small businesses. Colombia's national airline Avianca has filed for bankruptcy protection in a U.S. court. The passenger operations of Latin America's second largest airline have been grounded since March because of coronavirus outbreak. In a statement, the firm said it filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection in a court in New York. The process postpones a U.S. company's obligations to its creditors, giving it time to reorganize its debts or sell parts of the business. Chief Executive and co-founder So the pandemic has cut more than 80% of its income, and it is struggling with high fixed costs.
Avianca is facing the most unprecedented event in its 100-year history. Given the effects of COVID-19 pandemic, global passenger traffic is coming in at under more than 90%, and it is predicted that the global aero traffic sector will see a revenue fall about $314 billion, according to the IATA.
If Avianca fails to come out of bankruptcy, this will make it the first major airline to go under amid the pandemic. Now let's look at the European stock markets, which are trading mixed over hopes on the revival of economic activity as most regional governments plan to lift lockdown. CAC 40 in Paris is trading fractionally lower. London's FTSE 100 has gained a fraction, while Frankfurt's DAX is trading marginally higher. In Asia, Hong Kong's Hang Seng led the gains, closing over 1.5% higher. Nikkei 225 gained over 1%, while Shanghai Composite edged lower. Meanwhile, international benchmark Brent crude oil price has lost nearly 2%. Now let's look at the weather from around the globe. These were the headlines. This is all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at indus.news.